So, what on earth could a fantasy novel about hobbits possibly have to do with a centuries-old theological debate about Holy Communion? I know, it sounds like a real stretch, but as we're about to see, the connection is actually surprisingly deep, and it all kicks off with a simple, almost magical piece of bread. If you're a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien, you know this line. It's iconic. It's this promise of something that's way more than just food. It's about a kind of magical sustenance, a special gift for the heroes of Middle-earth on their most dangerous quest. Right, Lambas, or whey bread. It was this special food made by the elves. And it might not look like much. It's small and simple, but it had the power to keep a traveler going through a long, tough journey. A single bite was actually enough to sustain a grown man for a whole day. Well, that's the big question, isn't it? How does this piece of fictional, magical food become a really powerful metaphor for one of the most sacred practices in all of Christianity? And this is where a theologian named Ray Sutton jumps in. He really focuses on this idea of whey bread. For him, Holy Communion isn't just some dusty old ritual. No, he argues it's essential spiritual sustenance. It's the food we're given for the long and, let's face it, pretty challenging journey of the Christian life. And wow, when you put them side by side like this, the parallels are kind of undeniable. Lambas bread is small, but its effect is huge. The Eucharist is a tiny wafer, but its spiritual meaning is immense. Lambas keeps the fellowship going on their physical quest. Communion is meant to keep believers going on their spiritual one. And here's the key. Lambas was for everyone on the quest, big or small. And that idea is really the foundation for Sutton's entire argument. Okay, so to build his case, Sutton first takes us to a really powerful story in the Gospel of Matthew. It's all about a desperate mother and a few crumbs of bread. So Sutton brings us to this really tough scene in the gospel. You have a Canaanite woman, an outsider, who comes to Jesus just begging him to heal her daughter. But his first reaction, it sounds really harsh. He uses this metaphor, saying his mission is for the children of Israel first, and you don't give the children's bread to dogs. But her comeback, wow, it's incredible. It's just packed with faith and humility. She doesn't get defensive or argue that she's worthy. She basically says, I get it. But even the smallest bit of your grace, just a crumb that falls from the master's table, that's enough for me. And this right here is Sutton's whole point. A tiny bit of God's blessing goes a long, long way. He sees the Eucharist just like this. You don't have to be some spiritual giant to receive it. Even just a crumb of this grace is more than powerful enough to nourish you and cause real spiritual growth. Now let's keep building on this idea. Sutton finds his next piece of evidence in another famous story, this time involving Jesus, his disciples, and a group of kids. I mean, you can just picture this scene, can't you? You have all these parents eagerly bringing their children to see this famous teacher, just hoping he'll bless them. But the disciples, maybe they thought Jesus was too busy or too important, they basically try to shoo them all away. But Jesus' reaction is immediate and firm. He says, "Let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them." For Sutton, this is a huge moment. He argues that when churches prevent baptized children from taking communion, they're basically making the same mistake the disciples did. They're blocking the path to a blessing from Jesus himself. And here's the really crucial part. This wasn't just some symbolic gesture. In the Bible, blessings were often physical, something you could feel, transferred through an act like laying on of hands. Sutton sees the Eucharist, the actual physical bread and wine, as the ultimate continuation of that tangible, physical blessing from Christ to his people. Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. We have the metaphor of the lembas bread, the power of a single crumb from the table, and the importance of a tangible blessing for children. And all of that brings us to the very heart of this whey bread argument. And this leads us to a pretty serious question. If communion really is spiritual food for the journey, what happens when you keep it from the very people who need it to survive that journey?
The logic Sutton lays out is just incredibly simple and powerful. First off, all living things need to eat to grow. That's just a basic law of nature, right? Okay. Second, children are, by their very definition, in a state of constant growth. Third, if Holy Communion is, as this whey bread metaphor suggests, spiritual food, well then fourth, it just follows that for children to grow spiritually, they have to eat the spiritual food.
And here's the conclusion, put as plainly as possible. Sutton argues that to keep kids from communion isn't just about rules or procedures. It's actively cutting them off from a primary source of God's grace in their own spiritual development.
It's not just helpful food, it's necessary food. It is, as Sutton says right here, the essential way bread that God provides for the journey.
So the stakes, according to this argument, couldn't be any higher. Sutton uses this really stark image to make his final point. Withholding this spiritual food is like sending a hiker into the wilderness with no food or water. The outcome is both predictable and tragic. And so that really leaves us with the big question at the core of this entire debate. Is communion a graduation prize, something you get only when you've reached a certain level of maturity and understanding? Or is it the essential food, the way bread, given to everyone, even the smallest hobbits among us, to keep them going on the long, hard journey ahead?